Hi, and welcome to this Thrive Today series. How do the relational skills address my biggest problems? My name is Kristy Harrang, and this series that we do at Thrive Today consists of conversations with our president and co-founder, Chris Coursey, where we talk about topics that are relevant for many of us in our everyday lives and how relational skills can help us with these parts of our lives. And so today we are having a conversation on the topic of navigating political tensions. At the time of this recording, the United States is having a presidential election, and elections like these can produce some big feelings for many. So we're having a conversation about how to manage these big feelings that come up, as well as principles to help us remain our best selves under the circumstances, as well as how to stay connected with people who hold opposing views. Now, I want to mention that this is a nonpartisan discussion, and so we are not going to be talking about political parties or any opinions on what anyone should believe. The other thing I want to mention is that while this discussion is set within the context of politics, the tips and skills that Chris is going to be sharing with us are really relevant for any similar situation where big emotions are present. I hope you enjoy. All right, well, Chris, there are some situations where emotions tend to run high. Politics is definitely one of those situations. And in the United States right now, at the time of this recording, we're in the midst of a big election year. So can you talk to us? I have two questions. Number one is talk to us about some of the emotions that people are feeling in times like these, some of the things you're observing. And number two, why you think emotions tend to run so high in situations like these.
Yeah, those are excellent questions, Kristy. And you know what? When I think about what people are feeling, Jim Wilder in the Life Model calls the emotions the big six. And honestly, I think we're probably hitting about all of these six emotions as we gear up for the election. There's a lot of emotions going on. And some of us are just really worried and fearful and afraid of what's going to happen if my candidate, loses. What does that mean? Which then that leads to hopeless despair, right? Like, I don't know what I'm going to do if this happens. And these are big emotions, Kristy. Like, people are feeling this. Their cups are full. And there's, I think there's sadness and loss as well. And honestly, I think that goes into what the other part of this question, which is why are things so big around the election? And you know what? I think from what I gather interacting with people and thinking about it myself is this: we fear outcomes that are personal for me or for my family, for my children, for my community, right? There's a lot of pain and there's a lot of fear. And so what we're getting here is a perfect storm, and that leads to anger, right? That's where we just get mad because we want something to stop. And I'll tell you what, there's a whole lot of anger and a whole lot of enemy mode that's coming out of these big feelings. And there's also a bit of disgust woven through all of this as well, Kristy, that people are feeling very disgusted at what they're seeing happening on the other side of the aisle. And that is scary for people. Like, you combine these emotions, you get a perfect storm here. And the thing about the brain and emotions is when I'm feeling some of these, and some of it's not only what's happening now, but it's anticipatory of where this is going. What that does is that triggers pain from back here. So it feels intolerable for people, and people aren't able to use words to share different perspectives, because it just, these big emotions end up putting us in enemy mode. And it is like a perfect storm, Kristy. It's really hard for people to navigate.
Yeah. Well, I love what you're saying, though, is realizing that these things, it's bringing up things that are personal to us, things that matter to us. And in
Yeah.
a sense, we really want to validate how people feel, but it
Yes.
does matter. And it
Yeah.
makes sense that we're feeling these big emotions. That's real. And so, Chris, with that, though, we tend to sometimes get stuck. We get stuck in anger, we get stuck in fear, and then it's hard for us to act like our best selves. We kind of lose ourselves in that. So do you have any tips, just maybe one tip for somebody who is feeling stuck in an emotion, of what they can do to help them get unstuck?
Yeah, one of the best things you can do is actually breathe. Deep breathing. That just taking a moment to catch your breath. The first thing to go when our fight or flight response starts kicking into gear is we start shallow breathing. And so I would say, let's take some deep breaths. Let's quiet. We need the quieting skills. And in that, we're working on getting relational. We're trying to just get our footing here because we know when I'm not in my relational mode or relational sweet spot, everything else is harder. So remembering to breathe, which leads to quieting, which helps me better get relational. And then I can remember some of how God's provided for me before. And that helps me remember if God did this back here, if he parted the Red Sea back here, then what is he capable of doing up here? Right. So we want to remember those times and even share stories of times of God's faithfulness. And of course, as we do that, we're also trying to interact with what God is up to in all of this. Because you know what? God is up to something. He is up to something here. He sees it. He's well aware of what's happening in our country. He's aware of all the many complex dynamics going on. And so really staying anchored with the living God, seeing some of what he sees and interacting with him, that helps to refresh our peace while we learn to feel our feelings and share our feelings and quiet our feelings. And that's really a nice recipe right there, Kristy, just to help us stay anchored
Mhm.
while we navigate this terrain.
It's really good. That reminds me of one of the phrases I picked up along the way that's been so helpful for me is especially when I'm feeling anxious, fearful, is like God sees and he deeply cares, but he is not anxious.
So
He is
good.
not anxious. And so if he's not anxious, how do I connect with him? Get his heartbeat
So
on
good.
this because he,
Yeah,
yeah. So,
it's
um,
good.
so what about the last question I want to ask is any tips for when we're coming across someone or we're dealing with two different people who have very strong opposing views and they're having a hard time connecting because these clashing views are just causing a lot of friction in the relationship.
Yeah, this is a big one here because that is happening a lot, and we're kind of losing our ability to be able to hear other perspectives, and really it's understanding the mind. And so as we've talked a lot about return to joy and our resources, part of helping to navigate this terrain is just help using validation and comfort, what we like to call the VCR process in the life model. We learn to validate what people are feeling, what's going on in them. We might not agree with their outcomes. We might not agree with what they're going to vote, but we can validate what they're feeling. And then we can even offer some comfort. Like, what do you need when you feel this way? These are really big feelings, right? Because validation saying what you see, and then the comfort follows up with, hey, what is helpful under these circumstances? While we have this conversation, what would be helpful? Because I really want to understand you, but I also want you to be able to understand me. So we use the validation and comfort sequence interacting with people who have different, beliefs than we may have. But then we're also, connecting with the living God as well and seeing people through the perspective of what God sees when he looks at this person. So I might have a hard time, interacting with someone because of just we have completely different perspectives. But you know what? God's side actually helps me to see this is another human being made in God's image. They have fears like I have fears. They have hurts like I have hurts. And so what the God site does is it just personalizes those interactions so that we can stay present and loving and kind while we validate and comfort and really try to understand each other. Honestly, Kristy, those skills right there would completely change the landscape if we were able to practice some of these skills when we're interacting with people, family members, friends, strangers who might have different perspectives on the election than we have.
I love that. And it makes me think when we can get out of enemy mode and really try to hear and see each other, so often we discover we have a lot more in common than we thought we did. And we begin to find areas of commonality, even if it's only that we both feel afraid. Well, hey, then we can connect with each other over this similar feeling that we're both experiencing. So
That's right.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Chris. It's been wonderful to
Yes.
chat with you on this topic, and thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation. And if you would like to learn more on the topics that we were talking about, I have a couple of options for you. The first is that we are holding a webinar on stories of emotions where we're going to dive more into this topic of learning how to manage what we feel and be present with other people in theirs. And so for this webinar, Jen and Chris Coursey and myself are going to be sharing stories from our journey of learning to manage our emotions and be with others in theirs. And these stories are going to provide great models for how relational skills can help us in regulating emotions, as well as what it can look like to remain our best true selves, even when big emotions are present. There is a link here on the screen. Also in the description of this video will be a link to register, or if you're watching after the fact, there'll be a link to access the recording. Next, we have a past webinar that we did on relationships and politics. So if you really want to learn more in this context of politics, how to navigate these tensions in your relationships, I suggest you check out this webinar where Chris dives more into some of these skills that he brought up in our discussion today. And so he's going to go deeper into all of those, and you can access that at the link here. It'll be in the description of this video as well. And as always, if you are looking for other resources or you're trying to find the best relational skill resources for you, you can visit our website at thrivetoday.org or email us at info@thrivetoday.org, and we'd love to help you find what you're looking for. So with that, I just want to thank you so much for joining us for this segment of How Do the Relational Skills Address My Biggest Problems. We've enjoyed having you with us and look forward to seeing you in the future.